I'd like to now announce about our next segment, which is a fireside chat by Forcepoint. We have our speakers, Mr. Brandon Tan, who is APAC Director, Sales Engineering for Forcepoint, and Mr. Vinayak Godse, who is Vice President, DSCI, who will be joining us for this very interesting fireside chat on bringing an adaptive trust mindset to data protection. So we now have both of our speakers with us, and therefore I'll hand it over to Mr. Vinayak Godse. Over to you.
Are you able to hear me?
Loud and clear.
Welcome, Brandon, for this fireside chat on data protection and the role the security plays in data protection. And we most of the time we talk about cybersecurity and adaptive cybersecurity, and there are a lot of interesting frameworks which are coming from cybersecurity. But increasingly, the way the organizations are collecting data, making use of the data, and the quantum and complexity of data that is being collected and being deployed for digitization purpose, either to give good experience or improve the productivity or probably find the new possibilities. So increasingly the liabilities are also significantly coming to data. So being one of the leader in providing data protection solution, I would really like to use this particular time to take your views on some of those interesting evaluations which are happening with respect to the data protection and the technology which is coming for that one. So we usually talk about cybersecurity threats, right? And they have been discussed by cybersecurity professionals a lot. But then data protection, data privacy brings very interesting element to the discussion, basically. So how do you see the trends of cybersecurity, particularly in the aspects of the data protection and data privacy, how they are shaping?
First of all, hi, Mr. Vinayak, and a big thank you for having me here. All right, and you brought up a very good, point, on the trend, data creation, and the amount of data that's created today, and how it's being consumed and how it's being moved around from on-prem, to cloud, the adoption of digital transformation. So one of the big trends that we're seeing over here, and I take it as two different questions. There is one on data privacy and there's one on data protection. All right, let's address the data privacy part of it. I think more and more regulation will be drafted up on the privacy end of things. And if you take examples where I'm currently in Singapore, so we have PDPA, Privacy Data Protection Act. All right, and then there is similar thing like Personal Data Protection Act in Malaysia. There is PDPA in Thailand. There is Privacy Act in Philippines. There is California Consumer Act. There is GDPR in the EU. And it's a matter of time. All right, if I look into India, and I have spoken to some of my peers and my colleagues over there, it's like you guys could potentially be looking at the national legislation when it comes to data privacy. So that is something that is inevitably coming. And the sooner organizations realize that, the sooner they can start preparing for it. Now, the data protection itself, it's a completely different topic by itself. We are seeing massive trends of hacks where data is being targeted. All right, if you look into different sessions, in the entire AISS, you'll be hearing things about hacks. You hear things about ransomware, and there's one huge thing. When people hack the organization, they don't just hack it for fun. There is something they're after. All right, and people say, data is the new oil is the money, therefore data is money, and it's a lot of valuable thing, in data that they extract it out. And I heard about a couple of speakers, before me, they were speaking about ransomware, and we detected a couple of issues that is very interesting because prior to installing the ransomware, they extracted the data and then lock it in for a ransomware. It's a double whammy. I want your data, and then I hold you ransom to pay me money to return some to you, and I still keep a copy of your data, right? If you think about it. And there are few examples. Pfizer hacks, and I think everyone have heard of it. The Pfizer vaccine in Europe has been, there are reports that say that it has been compromised, landed in some hackers' hand. And I heard from today's session, there is this COVID patient database in India that got hacked as well. And then they are, the US, agencies, the Sunburst malware, and I think it's a big topic here and of today. And all these 3 incidents happened within last 7 days, and it's amazing. So if you look into it, there will be more and more hacks that will be going after data, and that's the trend that we are foreseeing, Mr. Vinay.
Yeah. So as an industry body here in India, right, and we have membership base all across the industry vectors and industry sectors, and we had been advising in the wake of the GDPR, in the wake of now personal data protection bill which is coming in, we have been advising our members, those who are user of our technology and those who are providing services to the consumer, especially in B2C and now increasingly B2B as well, because data protection also influences a lot of B2B decision makings as well. So we have been advising them to spend more, invest more for data protection and data security. But I'd like to understand, so this is largely for the user industry we have been talking about, but I'd like to also understand from you as one of the important player in the market in the data protection scale. So how you have been investing in doing a research or engineering of a solutions and capability to solve the problems of data protection, and where exactly that research and that kind of investment is going from the player like a Forcepoint in the area for data protection and data security?
It's a very good question. So if you look into the attacks themselves, a lot of these attacks are nation-state sponsored. It's extremely sophisticated, and a lot of them are automated. It's not exactly a human behind it. And if you look at the defense mechanism, a lot of these are manual. All right, you have automation to detect it, but upon detecting it, the mitigation itself, a lot of time is manual. There is a need of change of configuration. There is a need of incident management. There is a need of track response. All right. So where we are investing as a company is we are looking into automation of mitigation. All right, so that when there is an attack that happens, a system can self-heal and self-protect the organization. All right, and that will be the direction, right, of what we call a adaptive response type of cybersecurity defense.
Now, another thing which really struck me in today's workshop when you have been discussing about some of the interesting idea, and especially I picked up one thing is a zero trust architecture, and in last 7-8 months we heard a lot and we had been deliberating a lot, but primarily it was confined to the discussion of network level access security, network security, and probably solving the problem of providing the secure access to the network or application basically. But how does this concept of zero trust architecture is relevant to data security issues and problems?
Fantastic, Mr. Vinaya. If you look into zero trust itself, it's initially been coined by an analyst in Forrester. All right, but one of the best publications that a lot of security practitioners is referring to, it's actually the NIST, standard documents of zero trust architecture, and in that documentation it speaks about the 7 tenets, all right, of zero trust, and then part of that 7 tenets speaks about a continuous assessment of your users as they access resources, and resources over here refers to any computing services and data. All right. So, and of course, the idea of zero trust is not that complicated. It should be clear by now that you should not trust anyone. All right. But that's just one part. Now, the other part here is you have to continuously assess the person that you have trusted initially. And that applies to data protection. So if I allow, for example, Mr. Vinaya to access to this file now, it doesn't mean that I have the static policies that allow you to access the file forever. All right. So in the case of Forcepoint, we research into technology that studies human behavior. So it depends on your risk level and your behavior. I would then determine if A, you should have access to it, or B, if you already have access to it, should I revoke it? Or C, if you have access to this document, for the next documents that you try to access, should I start limiting it? All right, and that is basically what we mean by a zero trust type of approach, all right, in sense of data protection.
So some important thing that we had been saying because of this volume and complexity and our ability to think about all the possibility, right? And no matter how much we think now, the security can't be really deterministic at this point of time. So you can't determine what could go wrong, right? And during the evaluation, you will go to some operating situation, and that situation may compromise, or may bring some compromise, or can lead to some of the larger ramification as well, right? So adaptability in terms of way you devise the policies, way you devise your controls, way you devise your protection decisions, basically, or decisions that you make. So this adaptability, which is coming as a very important concept, conceptual principle basically, which are now driving the architectures like this one. So how does it play a role in the context of data security or in the context of data protection? Because the expectation of privacy has been becoming very specific, very granular, and they are changing dynamically as well.
So the easiest way to look into it is to imagine some of the simpler solutions. So in Forcepoint, we're one of the market leader in terms of data loss prevention. So it's a DLP tool. All right. So if you get some files, you may get blocked. If you send some files, you may be allowed. Right. In the past, the action of protecting the files, or the action that determines whether you can extract it or not, is static policies. All right. So imagine the same technology now, but the DLP doesn't look into static policies. The DLP look into behavioral analysis. So it depends what you have been doing for the past 1 day. What have you been doing for the past 4 to 6 hours? All right. So if you change your behavior, you have demonstrated that you are extremely reckless. You are extremely risky in the way you consume computing resources. Then naturally the policies should be stricter on you. If you have demonstrated compliance, if you have demonstrated great governance, if you have demonstrated great behavior as you use confidential data, then naturally the policy should flex it a little bit, right? It should allow some form of flexibility to allow you to consume it in a less friction manner, all right? And with that, you are actually achieving two things. A, you are protecting it, and B, you are freeing up the good, all right? You are creating less friction. And that's a decade type of debate, between the CIO and between the business, and the CISO will say, I need to protect it. The business say, I need to do business a bit quicker. All right. And then now you are looking into potentially a solution that allows you to secure it, and yet, for people to do their business faster.
So we would be seeing very peculiar situation in India, right? So this full 1 year had gone in terms of this transition to work from home environment, and probably in another 5-6 months time we'll be probably settling with respect to this pandemic, and by that time we would have our own privacy data protection bill as well coming in, basically, right? So this transition this year was largely managing work from home security. Next year would be managing the privacy expectation and compliance as well, right? So and we are seeing in the geography that you had been working with your clients, basically Philippines you talk about, or Singapore you talked about, basically. There must be some learning for the Indian organization who would be, but next year we will hope that this this bill will be passed in the parliament. How should they go about preparing themselves to solve this question of data protection with the context of digitization they are into, and with the context of this transition from solving problem of work from home to then looking at the data privacy expectation, obligations, liabilities that will be imposed on them by next year.
So if there's one thing that is obvious, with the work from home phenomena, There's a lot of things are moving to the cloud, and the speed, of transiting to the cloud, it's faster than ever. And one, good strategy to think about is after the pandemic, things will change forever. As much as people will start going back to office, you're not going to stop. The fact that a lot of them will be continuously working from home or working remotely. Now, with that, the cloud is here to stay. Things that have gone, organizations that have gone cloud, it's not going to reverse on their strategy and come back on-prem. Now, the first thing here is, what type of data protection strategy will allow you to effectively manage the cloud? So the best way to secure the cloud is to do it from the cloud itself. So you would be looking into solution that allows you to perform, a zero trust type of access on the cloud. And on top and above that zero trust architecture, they must be, elements of data protection. All right. So in this case, it will be a data loss prevention, a behavioral analytics, as users start consuming web, their email, their SaaS application. So all these elements of data protection have to be there. It has to be a design in principle. Any application that you want to launch, any subscription of vendor that you want to go to, you have to start thinking about data privacy. All right. And it should not be an aftermath kind of thing. I buy this software and then eventually I start thinking about how do I want to secure it. All right. And having that strategy early, it's going to allow organizations to prepare themselves better. If they were to release, a new privacy type of regulatory requirement, right, they will be able to cope with it very, very quickly because by design, it's already preparing them for that transition.
So let's deliberate towards the end of this discussion. Basically, it's good perspective we covered, and one important thing which I would like to cover before we conclude is so the expectation and requirements of privacy are now becoming very specific, very granular. We say as a DSCI, subject matters of privacy. There are many more subject matters of privacy, and each subject matter is now characterized with a lot of specificity, a lot of granularity, and a lot of nuance level of implementation, procedural requirement as well, apart from the outcome level liability that comes to you, right? This is on one hand. On the other hand, number of transactions that you have been processing. So last 1 month, a couple of months, we were seeing in our case, digital payment transaction processing, 2 billion plus transactions are getting processed every month, basically. So we have seen a lot of volume and a lot of pace up and speed up transaction processing, which is happening. And each of those transactions has to match with the expectation of privacy. And those expectations are, one is the number of privacy subject matters, and other is the granularity, specificity, and nuance level of definition of those liabilities as coming in. So how do you make this particular equation in a very dynamic form? So probably the expectation may change in the future. That way you process the transaction may change. You would find some new way of doing the transaction, and then you need to unlearn what is happening basically. So how do you really engineer this expectation so that you support the digitization on one hand, on the other hand you probably manage the expectation of the security, expectation of the flexibility, expectation of the frictionless transaction processing, and also the compliance requirement of privacy. So with this we can conclude really this discussion.
Thank you. So I think as of any other security approach, we always start with risk-based. All right, we can't boil the ocean. There will be blind spot naturally. All right, and you start thinking about what are my crown jewel, where are we moving them, and how do we protect this type of data first. All right, again, and of course, we are using this word data privacy, for example. All right, and then you go into legislation, you go into the granularity of it, and then they start defining what is covered under this data privacy law, for example. And then they will come to you and say, all right, maybe your name, your address, your national ID, and so on and so forth. All right, and that is something that Forcepoint has been doing very, very well in other regions, and there will be learning points that we can do, because in the case of GDPR, we pre-curated the entire policies and have it inbuilt into the system. So in this sense, when organizations engage us on a data privacy or compliance type of project or initiative, they don't have to start from ground zero. All right, it will be pre-built policies that there will be a checklist that say, what do you want to comply to, and which of these data sets applies to you? What type of information are you collecting from your customers or your employees, and which of these are concerning you? And then immediately they will ask you, where do you want to protect them? Do you want to protect them on the web transactions, or the email transactions, or on the cloud application transactions? All right. Obviously, there will be other areas that could be blind spot. But if you think about the main channel of leakages, right, this would have covered 80 or 90% of most cases. All right, and that will be basically the fastest way, the granularity of it, the channel, and I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think very well. I think thank you, Brandon, for really spending time with us and really in a short time, really touching on all of those very important issues of how we can transition from the current environment to the environment, probably which on one hand is a very digitization focused environment, where you push towards digitization, and at the same time managing the expectation of privacy is also becoming very specific, very granular, with the increasing number of obligations and increasing intensity of the liabilities. Thank you for spending time with us and really in short time really touching on all those key important issues that we all as a security leadership would be reflecting on in coming future. Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Mr. Vinayak.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Godse and Mr. Brandon Tan, for that very interesting fireside chat. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Well, for all of our audiences, with that, we have come to an end of our keynote session segment. And that's all we had for you in this segment. So thank you once again for joining us this evening. Do not forget to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is DSCI_Connect, and engage with us using the hashtag AISS2020. And like I mentioned, you can also visit the exhibition space on the top ribbon. You can follow instructions, and we have exhibitors who are waiting for our delegates to interact with them. And do visit our exhibition space and tweet about the event. Thank you once again.